Good afternoon. I am Lily Franklin, and today's topic for the training is conducting contracting for vended meals. First, let's start out by understanding the difference between a vended meal contract and a food service management contract. A vended meal contract includes the procurement of cooked food. The vendor drops off the prepared food, either in bulk or unitized meals. The SFA staff at the site handles the meal service operation, which involves serving of food to students, handling the point of service, cleanup, and etc. The vendor provides no program management services to the SFA. The contract is solely for cooked food products with or without milk. A food service management company contract includes the procurement of food and services. While each contract could be different, typically the food service management company would cook and serve the food, handle the point of service, clean up, and etc. The services provided by the FSMC are up to the SFA. All SFAs can procure cooked food as long as procurement regulations are followed. This would be considered a vended meal contract. So SFAs are now required to use the state prototype vended meal IFB, RFQ, or contract template. The advantage to using the prototype vended meal contract is that you are assured the contract meets USDA's guidelines. The SFA has to obtain state agency approval prior to a vended meal contract execution. Even though state agency approval is required prior to contract execution, it is still ultimately the SFA's responsibility to ensure the contract complies with local, state, and federal guidelines and regulations. Therefore, it is the SFA's responsibility to ensure the school district's legal department reviews all IFBs, RFQs, and contracting information prior to advertisement. So it is time to discuss the responsibilities of the sponsor. The following responsibilities do not change even if the SFA contracts with a vendor to receive vended meals. So the SFA is responsible for ensuring that the procurement of a vended meal contract follows all USDA, state, and local regulations. All vended meal contracts must be competitively bid using a prototype provided by LDOE's Division of Nutrition Support. All SFAs must use the prototype for the year that is designated in the prototype. The sponsor is also responsible for completing the procurement process for the initial contract and annual renewals, overseeing the implementation of the contract to assure that contract terms are met and meet local, state, and federal procurement requirements. Monitor the vendor's performance throughout the school year, and for multiple sites, multi-site sponsors conduct an on-site review of meal counting and claiming procedures at all sites by February 1st of each year and developing corrective action plans as needed. The sponsor must implement a food service advisory committee composed of parents, teachers, and students to assist with menu planning and ensure that the vendor follows through with menu changes. There have been a number of findings on administrative reviews due to the SFA not having an advisory committee and advisory committee meetings on a regular basis, not including parents, teachers, or students, not having documented minutes of the meetings, and not implementing recommendations from the advisory committee. The authorized representative must appoint and train determining officials and hearing officials. Assistance is available from the state agency if necessary and needed. The sponsor must distribute applications for CMP benefits and related information to parents and guardians and collect applications submitted for CMP benefits. The sponsor must administer all aspects of the meal eligibility verification process, complete and submit the monthly claim, and maintain a separate food service fund to which reimbursement and other food service revenues are posted and expenses are paid. A consultant or other vendor cannot submit claims for the SFA. The state agency strongly discourages the SFA from giving out their username and password to others to submit for them. SFAs must remember that they are 100% responsible for anything submitted in their name or submitted by someone that has been given access to their online system. We have had instances where the SFA is dependent on a consultant to submit the claim, and the consultant does not submit it in a timely manner. The SFA loses the reimbursement, not the consultant. The consultant fees will still be due and owing, even if the SFA loses its reimbursement due to failure to timely submit claims. The determining officials of the organization are responsible for processing free or reduced price applications, including approval, denial, and follow-up with households to obtain additional information. The determining officials enter data into the computer and maintain control of the computer system that automatically determines eligibility. The sponsor is responsible for administering the direct certification process and for notifying parents and guardians of the student's application status. Our next topic is vended meal procurement. So the prototype provided by LDOE must be utilized to procure food and services with a vendor. The prototype must be used with no alterations, additions, or deletions. The contract approval process should begin several months before the effective date of the contract. The effective date of all contracts is recommended to be July 1st or the beginning of the school year. Contracts are written for up to 1 year with the option to renew the contract for an additional 4 years. All contracts end on June 30th each year. So sponsors must comply with all regulations concerning procurement, and that includes 2 CFR Part 200, USDA program regulations, so 7 CFR Part 210, Part 215, Part 220, Part 225, and Part 250, as well as other USDA guidance and instructions. The sponsor must also follow all state and local laws, regulations, and policies that are not in conflict with federal requirements. Now, we will discuss procurement processes for vended meal services. To begin the process, download the appropriate year's IFB or RFQ vended meal prototype from the Child Nutrition Program website. There is a detailed instruction guide on the CNP website to assist you in completing the IFB or RFQ. Develop the 21-day cycle menu. Vendors are no longer allowed to create their own 21-day cycle menus in the state of Louisiana. This change is necessary to ensure that all vendors are submitting bids on equal footing. The variation in menus makes evaluating bids more difficult for SFAs. Also, menu variations make competition unnecessarily difficult for smaller vendors to submit competitive bids. Creating more competition in the vendor market is the driving force for restricting 21-day cycle menu creation to SFAs only. Remember, the 21-day menu in the proposal must be used for the first 21 days. If the SFA is unable to create their own 21-day cycle menu, do not be concerned or discouraged by the new change. The state agency has thought about ways to empower and assist you in confident vendor procurement. The SFA can use the state agency prototype menu if the SFA does not have the ability to create its own. Ultimately, the SFA is responsible for making sure the menu meets the minimum requirements before awarding the contract. The state agency has added some of the optional requirements that an SFA can choose. The IFB or RFQ can dictate the number of entree choices at breakfast and lunch, and the SFA can also choose to have 2 varieties of fruit to comprise the fruit component at breakfast and lunch for grades 9 through 12. Very often, state agency representatives have seen where only 1 fruit is offered. The student can take 2 fruits, but the students are not aware. The vendor must provide signage to indicate that students can take 2 fruits or both fruits. The vendor contract is strictly a fixed fee contract. The vendor can only charge for the number of meals served at the rate submitted in the bid, not the number of meals delivered. No other fees may be charged to the sponsor for any reason. There can be no late fees, charges for meals delivered, supply costs, additional employees needed, or etc. Any additional fees charged to a SFA are unallowable and may not be paid with child nutrition funds. Vendors shall be provided the option to receive IFB documents and submit bids through a uniform and secure electronic interactive system. Evidence of the interactive system being proposed for use by the SFA must be submitted with the Step 1 documents for state agency review and approval. Vendors shall follow the standards for the receipt of electronic bids adopted by the Office of the Governor, Division of Administration, and the Office of Information Technology, and shall make the appropriate provisions necessary for the acceptance of electronic bids for all purchases requiring competitive bidding. Any special conditions or requirement for the submission shall be specified in the advertisements. The SFA shall provide documentation of the use of a uniform, secure electronic interactive system with the Step 2 documents. Email, web links, or submission through the school district website are not a replacement for this requirement. The newspaper advertisements are critical to a successful IFB. Louisiana law requires 2 separate advertisements in the newspaper on 2 separate days prior to the bid opening date. It is okay to publish the IFB documents on the school district's website. However, this does not replace the newspaper advertisement requirement. Failure to adhere to the Louisiana Revised Statute regarding newspaper advertising will result in the SFA having to rebid the IFB. Each vendor must provide the sponsor with menu certification documents utilizing a dated 1-week menu that includes portion sizes from the 21-day cycle menu included in the bid. The menu certification documents must include all age or grade groups served. The SFA shall develop the menu in accordance with the provisions of 7 CFR Part 210.10. The menu certification documents must contain all required information needed for approval by the state agency. Meals may not be served under this contract until the contract is approved by the state agency. Each vendor must include the signed, completed Buy American certification form with the bid documents. Any bid that does not include the form should be considered non-responsive. If the SFA awarding a contract notes that one vendor submitting a bid has no non-domestic food items listed and another has 25, the SFA should question why. If one company is able to purchase the domestic product, other companies should be able to as well. Remember that vendors can change the menu to avoid the use of non-domestic products. The Buy American requiremits cannot be transferred from the sponsor to the vendor. Although the vendor will be procuring some of the food used in the SFA's food service. The Buy American provision found in 7 CFR Part 210.21D requires sponsors to purchase domestic commodity products. These products must be produced and processed in the U.S. using agricultural commodities that are produced in the U.S. So in other words, sponsors are required to purchase, to the maximum extent possible, domestic commodities or products. According to 7 CFR 210.21D3, SFAs must include language requiring the purchase of foods that meet the Buy American requirements in all procurement procedures, solicitations, and contracts that apply to a sponsor located in the contiguous United States and is purchasing domestic commodities or products for the National School Lunch Program. There are exceptions to the Buy American certification form. However, all exceptions are required to be tracked to ensure they do not exceed 10% of the total annual commercial food costs for food products per year. Tracking the non-domestic food costs cannot be a task delegated to the consultant or the vendor. The SFA is completely responsible for this task. Exceptions to the Buy American provision should be used as a last resort. However, an alternative or exception may be approved upon request. To be considered for the alternative or exception, the request must be submitted in writing to a designated official a minimum of 14 days in advance of delivery. The request must include the price of the domestic food alternative substitute, the availability of domestic alternative substitute, and the quantity, reasons for exception, limited or lack of availability or price, and the price must be included. Prices must include price of the domestic food product and price of the non-domestic product that meets the required specifications of the domestic product. Limited exceptions to the Buy American requirement are found in 7 CFR 210.21D5. The product is listed on the Federal Acquisitions Regulations non-available articles list found at 48 CFR 25.104 and/or is not produced or manufactured in the U.S. in sufficient or reasonably available quantities of a satisfactory quality, or competitive bids reveal the cost of a U.S. product is significantly higher than a non-domestic product. By July 1st, 2025, non-domestic food purchases, those that do not meet the definition of domestic commodity or product as defined above, must not exceed 10% of total annual commercial food costs that a SFA purchases per school year. SFAs must maintain documentation except when the item purchased is found on the FAR non-available articles list when using the Buy American exception. However, the SFA must note that the item was located on the non-available articles list. Sponsors must maintain documentation to demonstrate that when using a Buy American exception, their non-domestic food purchases do not exceed the annual threshold specified in the third bullet. See the available USDA exceptions tracking standard form for use complying with the 10% total annual commercial food cost purchases. Harvested fish under Buy American requirements. So to meet the definition of a domestic commodity or product, harvested fish must meet the following requirements. Farm fish must be harvested within the U.S. or any territory or possession of the U.S., and wild-caught fish must be harvested within the exclusive economic zone of the U.S. or by a U.S. flagged vessel. So the SFA director must also sign the Buy American certification form after researching all items the vendor is proposing to use that are non-domestic and determining that the product is not produced or manufactured in the U.S. in sufficient and reasonably available quantities of satisfactory quality, or that the cost of the U.S. product is significantly higher than the non-domestic product and is approving the use of the non-domestic product. So one way of researching is to use the Agricultural Marketing Service website. The website provides guidance to the SFA in determining if domestic products are available. The downside of using this website is that the information being provided includes only the information available for today. So in the snapshot on this slide, we are looking to see if domestic peaches are available domestically. As of today, peaches are available in the Dallas terminal market only from Chile. No domestic peaches are available. So many fresh items are seasonally available in the US. You can require the vendor to only use a non-domestic product only if it is out of season in the US. Now we will look at optional evaluation criteria that may be used in the solicitation. Local procurement is also an optional evaluation factor. An increasing number of child nutrition program operators want to source local foods and provide complementary educational activities that emphasize food, agriculture, and nutrition while supporting the local economy and farmers. Including local procurement and advertising to students through education or other activities can enhance the program and encourage students to eat your meals. Federal regulations have recently expanded the definition of what is considered local procurement and how it can be procured. Now, SFAs may apply geographic preference to solicitations when procuring unprocessed, locally grown, or locally raised agriculture products, including the use of terms locally grown, locally raised, or locally caught as procurement specifications. Sponsors can also use the phrases as selection criteria for unprocessed or minimally processed food items. 7 CFR 210 Part 21G goes further in depth. It is up to the sponsor to determine the local area to which the geographic preference shall apply. Sponsors who receive local food grants through USDA, the Louisiana Department of Agriculture, or other means shall review the grant requirements to determine geographic preference parameters. It is up to the SFA and the SFA's legal department to ensure compliance with all grant procurement procedures. Some of the benefits of doing sourcing locally are supporting the local community, lower school meal program costs, increased meal participation, and reduced food waste. Some great resources for helping you navigate the procurement of local foods are available on the Farm to School website resource page. So we suggest keeping a printout or saving a copy to your desktop of the Procuring Local Foods for Child Nutrition Programs guide. This guide helps navigate the procurement rules correctly. It includes menu planning, basics, fundamental principles of procurement, several potential sources of local products, and a variety of ways to procure the products. Bid bond. So if a vendor submit a proposal over $60,000, or for charter schools, $250,000, and they are participating in the SFSP, they must submit a bid bond in the amount that is not less than 5% and no more than 10% of the value of the contract for which the proposal is made, as determined by the SFA and specified in the IFB. Vendors are prohibited from posing any alternative forms of bid bonds. Cash, certified checks, letters of credit, and escrow accounts are not acceptable substitutes for bid bonds. The bond must be from one of the Soretti companies listed in the most recent issue of the United States Department of Treasury, Circular 570. You can use the hyperlink on the slide to verify surety companies. Bid bonds must be provided to the state agency with the Step 2 documentation. The state agency has established bonding requirements for vendor contracts. When a vendor and a SFA enter into one or more contracts exceeding $60,000 or $250,000 for charters, the SFA shall obtain a performance bond from the chosen vendor in the amount of 10% of the total value of the contract for which the bid is made. The total value of the contract includes all programs the sponsor plans to operate. In Louisiana Revised Statute 38-2216, if the vendor enters into more than one contract with any one sponsor, the aggregate total of the contracts exceeds $60,000 or $250,000 for charters, the vendor shall obtain a performance bond covering all contracts. Vendors shall obtain performance bonds only from surety companies listed in the current Department of Treasury Circular 570. No sponsor shall allow vendors to post any alternative forms of bid or performance bonds, including but not limited to cash, certified checks, letters of credit, or escrow accounts. The performance bond, if applicable, must be provided to the state agency as a part of the Step 3 process. The state agency will not approve the vendor contract without receiving a performance bond of 10% based on the value of the entire contract. The chosen vendor must provide a certificate of insurance that indicates compliance with the IFB requirements. It is up to the SFA to review the certificate of insurance to ensure the vendor has sent an insurance certificate listing the below coverages in the amounts specified in the IFB. Failure to review the certificate of insurance prior to sending the certificate to the state agency will result in delay of state agency approval. Insurance is required for the following: comprehensive general liability, automobile liability, and excess umbrella. Now, the prototype contains an additional line for any extra insurance the sponsor requires vendors to have before awarding the bid. The certificate of insurance must name the SFA as an additional insured party on all policies. The vendor must provide a waiver of subrogation in favor of the SFA. A waiver of subrogation is an endorsement that prohibits any insurance carrier from recovering the money they paid on a claim from a negligent third party. The sponsor requires this endorsement from their vendor to avoid being held liable for claims that occur on their job site. The insurance contract requires that the sponsor be notified of the cancellation of insurance policies at least 30 days before the cancellation of insurance. The certificate of insurance is submitted to the state agency with the Step 3 documents. The state agency will not approve the contract without receiving the certificate of insurance. Language has been added to the IFB or contract to provide a vendor with instructions on how a protest is to be conducted. The SFA shall indicate the person the protest is to be sent to, along with their title and mailing address. The protest must be filed within 10 days after receiving the award notice. The protest must include the name, address, and telephone number of the protester, the signature of the protester or authorized representative, identification of the purchasing agency, and the solicitation or contract number, a detailed statement of the legal and factual grounds of the protest. Copies of relevant documents must also be included. And finally, the vendor representative must provide the form of relief requested. The SFA must provide a written response within 30 days of receipt of the protest. A written response to the protest must be made within 30 days from receipt of the protest. Pending the results of the protest or appeal, the contract that has been awarded shall not be affected by the protest or appeal. Pending final determination of a protest or appeal, the validity of a contract awarded and accepted in good faith shall not be affected by the fact that a protest or appeal has been filed. The SFA shall in all instances Disclose information regarding protests to the state agency. The step one document can be found in the vended meals instructions for completing the IFB. The sponsor completes and submits the original signed step one and proposed IFB to LDOE. Failure to submit the proposed IFB for prior approval before advertising may result in rebidding. Remember that all IFB or contract documents must be signed by an employee of the organization that has been authorized to enter into contracts on behalf of the SFA. This should be the person listed on the online application, such as the superintendent or authorized representative. Include bid opening time, date, and address in the IFB or contract documents. After receipt of the completed signed step one documents, the sponsor will receive written approval by LDOE to begin the solicitation process. The SFA must solicit bids from an adequate number of known qualified vendors. So at least 4 to 5 qualified vendors. The solicitation must be publicly advertised 2 times on 2 separate days in a regional news source. The first advertisement must be at least 21 days before the bid opening date. The first advertisement must not occur on a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday. The IFB is not to be advertised before state agency approval has been given. In instances where the SFA advertises only once, only advertises on the sponsor website, or advertises prior to state agency approval, the IFB must be re-advertised and the step one process must be completed from the beginning. All bids received by the SFA must be open at the time and place stated in the IFB. The bid opening must be conducted publicly. Bid openings are required to be open to the public. The state agency is no longer required to attend bid openings with an expected total contract amount of less than $100,000. If the total contract cost is expected to exceed $100,000, the SFA shall send a Zoom link to the state agency so that state agency staff can attend the bid opening. If a state agent is not present during the bid opening, the solicitation must be rebid. Sending the link for attendance is that important. So when awarding the IFB or contract, the SFA must award the contract to the most responsible and responsive bidder with the lowest price. There must be transparency in the award process. The bid opening must take place as listed on the solicitation. The public cannot be turned away or refused admittance into the bid opening. Bids cannot be opened during closed doors with just SFA staff. The process and documents must be able to withstand public scrutiny. The sponsor must be able to prove that the vending meal application was awarded to the most responsible bidder with the lowest price. So the vendor with the lowest cost must be awarded the contract unless the SFA can prove that the bid is either non-responsive or non-responsible or both. The vending meal contract is a fixed price contract. The vendor may not charge the sponsor any other fees than meal times rate. No administrative, delivery, late fees, or other fees are allowable. The vendor must propose a price based solely on meal times rate. Administrative fees, delivery fees, employee costs, and all other fees should be considered when the vendor is calculating the fixed price meal cost it chooses to list on the bid form. The sponsor must not sign any other contracts or agreements with the vendor. Any other contract signed for vended services cannot utilize CNP funds and must be paid for from the sponsor's general fund account. As listed in the state prototype, the vendor may only charge the sponsor for meals served, not delivered. This is stated a few places in the prototype contract. Each sponsor that has a vended meal contract must have an advisory committee. So what is an advisory committee recommending to make the vended meal service program more successful at your organization? The documented advisory committee meeting, recommendations, and action by the sponsor and vendor are requirements of the child nutrition program. The sponsor should have the necessary health inspections reports on file for the chosen vendor. You can access information on the chosen vendor by using the link on the slide or by searching Eat Safe Louisiana inspections. It is the sponsor's responsibility to ensure the vendor keeps its facilities clean and follows all the safety and sanitation regulations required by LDH. The manager must have passed the Serve Safe or other equivalent course and be certified. Failure to meet health inspection requirements as represented by LDH findings during school inspections or vendor facility inspections, such as in the central kitchen, is grounds for termination of the contract and exclusion from consideration in future IFBs. The inspection example on this slide indicates that the vendor is not keeping a clean, sanitary kitchen. Many of the violations are related to areas of the kitchen that are not clean. Some of the violations are due to poor maintenance on the part of the school itself. The last violation indicates that the vendor began operations before obtaining a permit to operate. The sponsor must not allow food to be prepared without the vendor having a valid permit to operate in the vendor's name. Child Nutrition Program regulations do not allow any meals to be claimed in any child nutrition program without a valid permit to operate. Many vendors do not like to deal with commodities because there's a lot of paperwork involved. Some sponsors do not like using them for the same reasons. If you, as the sponsor, are not receiving commodities, you're leaving money on the table and doing a disservice to your students. Commodities decrease the cost of the food served to students, so it also decreases the price the students have to pay. The vendor may be charging the sponsor $3.30 for each meal, but the commodity credits may amount to 20 to 30 cents per meal. That amount is deducted from the bill from the vendor. So it is imperative that sponsors take advantage of commodities. Sponsors are expected to apply for and utilize commodities. The purchase of commercial products when USDA donated foods are available will render the commercial purchase of these items as unreasonable and unnecessary and contributes to a higher cost for student meals. Vendors shall vendors shall accept and use USDA donated foods in a large of quantities as may be efficiently utilized in the sponsor's nonprofit food service, subject to approval of the sponsor. A bid that takes place and that places any restrictions on the use of commodities must be considered non-responsive and must not receive an award. Next, we will begin to discuss documentation required to receive step 2 approval. So, all employees participating in the vended meal procurement process must have a signed standards of conduct and certification statement. The sponsor must maintain the forms on file for the duration of the contract. Ensure the certification regarding debarment, suspension, ineligibility, and voluntary exclusion has been signed before awarding the contract. Also, make sure the sponsor has received the signed certification regarding lobbying and the disclosure of lobbying activities form. Execute the independent price determination certificate and maintain these documents on file. Additional documents to be submitted include the signed Step 2 document, bid form, evidence of electronic bidding service used, for example, centralbidding.com, an electronic copy of all bids submitted, copies of all correspondence between the sponsor and vendors, a signed copy of the contract before execution must be submitted. The sponsor can sign the contract document, but must not provide to the vendor until final approval of the contract is received from the state agency. So after the state agency has informed the sponsor that the Step 2 documents are approved, the sponsor can inform the winning vendor of their intent to award the contract. At that time, the vendor must provide the sponsor with the certificate of insurance and, if applicable, a performance bond. So the sponsor may not award the bid until written approval is received from the state agency. The sponsor may not claim meals for reimbursement served by a vendor until the contract is approved. This is a USDA regulation and must be followed. The sponsor is legally responsible for the conduct of the food service program and must supervise the food service operations in such a manner as will ensure compliance with the rules and regulations of the state agency and USDA regarding each of the child nutrition programs covered by the contract. The sponsor is responsible for ensuring that all corrections have been made if problems were noted during a sponsor review, the LDOE administrative review, or program audit. The sponsor must remember that they are 100% responsible for the food service program and no part of the responsibility can be delegated to a vendor or consultant. The 21-day menu included in the solicitation must be adhered to for the first 21 days of meal service. After that, changes may be made only with written approval of the sponsor. The sponsor must submit the written request to change the menu with an updated nutrient analysis. The sponsor must receive the updated analysis before approving menu changes. The analysis must show the menu is in compliance with USDA regulations. The sponsor is to maintain all menu change approvals and analyses on file. The sponsor is responsible for ensuring all menu requirements are met and only reimbursable meals are served and claimed. The sponsor is responsible for certifying the claim is correct. They must also make certain the food production records are completed each day for all reimbursable meals. The completed food production records must provide all information contained in the LDOE prototype food production record, regardless of whether they are completed by hand or are computer generated. All meals must meet the detailed specifications for the grade groups being served. No payment is to be made for meals that do not meet the minimum component requirements, quantity requirements, vegetable subgroup requirements, and nutrient specifications for the age or grade group served. The sponsor should be monitoring the menu to ensure they are meeting the required specifications. There have been many findings during administrative reviews where the vendor is not meeting the minimum requirements, particularly quantity requirements and the vegetable subgroup requirements. The vendor must provide an updated nutrient analysis to the sponsor when menu changes are made to ensure that nutrient specifications are being met. It must be reiterated when the administrative review finding is issued, the vendor is not the one receiving the finding. The sponsor is receiving the finding. The only time the sponsor should see non-domestic agricultural products being purchased by the vendor is when a domestic product is not available or when the price of the domestic product is substantially higher than the non-domestic product. Many domestic canned and frozen fruits and vegetables are available with the exception of some tropical varieties like bananas, pineapple, mandarin oranges, etc. Some domestically grown fresh fruits and vegetables are available seasonally. It is the sponsor's responsibility to know what agricultural products are available from the U.S. before approving exceptions. Please refer to the Buy American certification form. This is a vital part of managing the food contract. If assistance is needed, please contact the state agency. So termination language was added to the IFB to cover a severe breach of contract that would warrant immediate termination of the contract by the sponsor upon written notification to the vendor. And this can be found in the terms and termination section. The severe breach of contract would include failure to maintain and enforce required standards of sanitation, failure to maintain proper insurance coverage as outlined by the contract, failure to provide required information or statements in the required time frame outlined by the contract, or failure to maintain quality of service at a level satisfactory to the sponsor. The sponsor may terminate the contract immediately with written notice to the vendor. Please be aware that failure to maintain health inspections as represented by LDH findings during site inspections of the vendor's food facilities is not only grounds for termination of the contract, but may exclude the vendor from consideration in future IFBs or contracts. The SFA is also responsible for making sure all bills are monitored prior to payment to assure that the vendor has not double billed or included costs that are not allowed by the contract. Invoices must reflect only the number of meals times the contract rate. The sponsor is responsible for every aspect of the food service program. including ensuring that invoices only reflect meals served and not meals delivered. The role of a vendor is to purchase, cook, and prepare meals for the approved sites. The vendor also assists with meal counts at the point of service and other required duties that go along with tracking and improving food preparation. This includes menus used to prepare food. The sponsor is ultimately responsible for the management and oversight of the food service program. The sponsor cannot delegate responsibilities to the vendor that should be handled by the SFA. Administrative review, procurement review, and audit findings will not be issued to the vendor or any contracted consultant. They will be issued to the sponsor. Some non-delegable responsibilities also include procurement requirements. The sponsor cannot make the vendor responsible for procurement procedures that must be followed. Although the vendor makes purchases, it is up to the sponsor to ensure those purchases comply with state and federal regulations. This includes the Buy American exception tracking that must be completed to ensure that non-domestic food purchases do not exceed 10% of the annual commercial food costs per school year. Sponsors must ensure that Buy American verbiage is in all procurement plans, procedures, solicitations, and contracts, regardless of the procurement being formal or informal. Sponsors must ensure that the vendor is using state contract purchasing correctly if applicable. The state contract pricing can only be used as one source when procuring. The sponsor cannot delegate on-site monitoring to the vendor or consultant. The sponsor is responsible for conducting regular contract compliance reviews for at least one site and monitoring meal counting and claiming procedures for all campuses each semester. The sponsor cannot delegate financial responsibility. The sponsor has to retain control of all financial responsibilities as required by 7 CFR 210.19A1. The sponsor cannot delegate advisory board duties, health permit and inspections, food pricing, signatory authority, monthly claims for reimbursement, free and reduced price meal process, USDA donated foods, or any a la carte services. If you have any questions, please contact LDOE's Division of Nutrition Support. If you have any questions, you can call or email your questions using the information provided on the slide. We're going to take a moment to look in the chat if there are any questions.